The Light That Went Out. The Flannan Isles, December 1900. It is December 26th, 1900. Boxing Day. A relief keeper named Joseph Moore is sitting in an open boat pitching in the swell off a rock 21 miles west of the Isle of Lewis. He has been trying to land for 3 hours. The men on the cliff above have not waved. They have not come down to the landing. They have not answered the ship's whistle or the flare fired off the port bow of the lighthouse tender Hesperus. The flag is not flying. The provision boxes are not stacked at the crane. Moore steps onto the concrete of the east landing and climbs the iron railway up the cliff. 200 feet. His boots are wet. The wind is coming in off the Atlantic in a long, unbroken push. The gate is closed. The outer door is closed. He opens them both. The kitchen door is open. The fire is out. The beds are empty. The clocks have stopped. 3 lighthouse keepers vanished from that rock sometime on December 15th, 1900. No bodies were ever found, and for 125 years, people have been telling you the wrong story about what happened to them. The island is called Ilion Mor, Big Island in Gaelic. It is 38 acres of rock, rising 200 feet out of the North Atlantic. The men who had worked there for a year had a word for the nearest human habitation, Lewis, 21 miles to the east. That was the word, Lewis. Everything else was water. On December 7th, 1900, a superintendent from the Northern Lighthouse Board named Robert Muirhead made the crossing from Breskleet, inspected the station, shook hands with the 3 keepers on duty, and was rowed back out to his ship. He was, as he wrote later, the last person to bid them adieu. 19 days after that, Joseph Moore opened a door onto an empty kitchen. The case has everything that makes a mystery survive. A locked room, a remote location, 3 men, all of them capable, all of them experienced, none of them the kind to wander off a cliff without reason. A fully operational lighthouse with a lens that could throw a beam 20 nautical miles across the Atlantic, gone dark for 11 nights before anyone came to check. And then, over the decades that followed, something stranger happened. The facts of the case, which are sparse but coherent, were slowly replaced in the public record by things that were never true. An overturned chair that was not overturned. A meal on the table that was not on the table. Pages of a logbook that never existed, recording weeping men who were not weeping. Giant seabirds that flew from the rock as the relief ship approached. None of it happened. All of it is still being repeated. Tonight, I want to do 3 things. I want to walk you through what the record actually says. Then I want to show you where the fiction came in and who put it there and why it stuck. And then I want to tell you about the wave. Because the wave, I think, is the most honest answer we have. And it arrives in a place that was feared long before any lighthouse was built on it. 3 men walked out into the weather on December 15th, 1900. One of them left his coat behind. That is where we start. James Duckett was 43 years old. He was the principal keeper. He had been in the service of the Northern Lighthouse Board for 22 years, which was most of his adult life. His father had been a plowman. His wife, Mary Grierson, had grown up inside a lighthouse herself at Inchkeith, where Duckett had been stationed when they met. They had 4 children, Louisa, 16, Robert, 13, Annabella, 9, Arthur, 6. Duckett had been promoted to principal keeper in April 1896, which meant he had earned his station through the slow, exact arithmetic of the NLB career ladder. Muirhead, the superintendent, had personally spent a month with him on Island Moor during the summer of 1899 to get the station operational. The report Muirhead filed after the disaster is a procedural document, but you can feel the affection. Duckett was, in the language of the board, a reliable man. Thomas Marshall was 28. He was the second assistant. Before the NLB, he had been a seaman, which meant he had been on North Atlantic decks in conditions that would kill most landsmen. He had served as an occasional lightkeeper on Elsa Crag, which is another rock in another ocean, isolated in a different flavor. He was unmarried. His father, John Marshall, would later file a compensation claim with the NLB for the loss of his son. Thomas's sea boots were heavy. His oilskins were the kind that crackled when you moved in them. Donald MacArthur was around 40. He was an occasional keeper, which means he was a substitute, brought in to cover the regular first assistant, a man named William Ross, who had been sent to the mainland on sick leave. MacArthur was from Brascleet on Lewis. He had been a soldier. He was married with 2 children. The mythology around this case will try to tell you, decades later, that MacArthur was a brawler, a man prone to violence, the kind of man who might have cracked under the pressure of isolation and done something terrible. The contemporaneous record contains none of that. The NLB files contain no disciplinary action, no warnings, no reports. Just a man doing a substitute shift on an exposed rock in the middle of winter because someone else was sick. 3 men. That is the complete crew of Island Moor on the morning of December 15th, 1900. The rock itself is a problem. That needs to be said early because it matters for everything that follows. Island Moor is the largest of a group of 7 islands called the Flannan Isles. The older name is Nach Elenan Flannach, or the 7 Hunters, a name that predates written history in that part of the Hebrides. The islands sit in open ocean. There is nothing between them and the coast of Labrador. The fetch, which is the technical word for the uninterrupted distance a swell can travel across water, is measured in thousands of miles. Whatever the North Atlantic is doing, these rocks feel first. The cliffs rise 200 feet on the west side. The coastline is not smooth. It is incised with narrow vertical chasms called geos. A geo is a long, deep crack in the rock, usually opening to the sea at one end, often with a sea cave at the landward end. When a large swell enters a geo, the water gets compressed. The walls narrow. The cave at the back funnels the energy upward. A wave that would be 8 feet tall in open water can, inside the right geo, become something else, something vertical, something that goes straight up the cliff face and keeps going. The west landing on Island Moor is a geo. It terminates in a sea cave. This detail is going to matter a great deal in about 20 minutes. The lighthouse itself was a triumph of Victorian engineering. It was designed by David Allen Stevenson from the Stevenson family of lighthouse builders. These are the same Stevensons who built the Bell Rock Light, who built Skerryvore, who illuminated the Scottish coast for over a century and a half. Robert Louis Stevenson, the novelist, was from this family. He was the black sheep. He left the family business to write Treasure Island, which his relatives regarded as a disappointing career choice. The Flannan Isles Light cost £6,914 to build, which is roughly £400,000 in today's money. It was constructed between 1895 and 1899 by a contractor named George Lawson. Every stone of it was hauled up the cliff face from tossing supply boats because the island has no harbor. The tower is 75 feet tall. The lens was a third-order clamshell Fresnel, 140,000 candle power, visible for 20 nautical miles. 2 landing stages were built, east and west, because the wind direction on any given day might make one of them unusable. A cable-hauled railway ran up the cliff to move paraffin barrels and provisions to the compound. The maintenance of that cable, those cranes, and the boxes of equipment at the landing stages was a daily responsibility. It was the reason Ducat and Marshall went down to the West Landing. The light was lit for the first time on December 7, 1899. 1 year and 8 days later, it went dark. Here is the sequence from the record. December 7th, 1900. Muirhead relieves the station. Departs. Last handshake. December 7th through December 29th. The shore-based observer at Gallon Head on Lewis is a gamekeeper named Roderick Mackenzie. His job is to watch for the light at night and flag anything wrong. For 3 straight weeks, he sees nothing. Heavy haze, severe weather. The island is obscured from the mainland. He files no alarm because he has no view. This is a detail that matters. December 13th. The last formal written entry is made in the official logbook. December 14th. Routine meteorological notes are written on a slate inside the lighthouse. The slate is a chalkboard, essentially. The keepers wrote weather data there first and transcribed it to the logbook later. It was the scratch pad of the operation. December 15th, 9 in the morning. The final slate entries are recorded. Time the light was extinguished for the dawn. Barometer reading, thermometer reading, wind direction and strength. That is the last writing anyone does on Eilean Mor. December 15th, around midnight. A steamer called the SS Archtor, carrying cargo from Philadelphia to Leith, passes the Flannan Isles in poor weather. The captain notes in the log that the light is not burning. He makes a note. He continues to port. Atmospheric storytelling. The Archtor docks at Leith. The captain reports the unlit beacon to his shipping line, which passes the report to the NLB. The NLB does not immediately dispatch a vessel. The scheduled relief voyage is in 2 days. The assumption is that the relief will handle whatever has gone wrong. December 20th. The relief ship, the Hesperus, is delayed by gales. December 24th. The Hesperus sails from Breskleet on Lewis. Heavy seas, cannot land. December 26th, noon. The Hesperus arrives at Eilean Mor. Captain James Harvey notes the absence of the relief flag. He sounds the ship's whistle. He fires a flare. The rock stares back at him. Joseph Moore is put into an open boat and rowed to the east landing. He climbs the cliff. He finds what he finds. He comes back down. Harvey leaves Moore and 3 volunteer seamen on the island to man the light. Then he sails to Lewis and sends a telegram to the Northern Lighthouse Board in Edinburgh. A dreadful accident has happened at the Flannans. The 3 keepers, Dockett, Marshall, and the Occasional, have disappeared from the island. The clocks were stopped, and other signs indicated that the accident must have happened about a week ago. Poor fellows, they must have been blown over the cliffs. That is the first sentence ever written about what happened. A 1-line telegram. Poor fellows, they must have been blown over the cliffs. It is the conclusion the first man on the scene reached, and he reached it from the evidence in front of him. Muirhead arrives on December 29th. He spends hours at the West Landing. He inventories the clothing. He writes a report that will be filed on January 8, 1901. The inventory. Ducat's oilskins are missing. Marshall's oilskins and heavy sea boots are missing. MacArthur's wearing coat, the heavy weather coat he would have put on before stepping outside in a gale, is hanging on its peg inside the station. The West Landing. The iron railings along the concrete stairs are twisted and torn from their foundations. A life buoy that had been lashed to those railings is gone, with shreds of canvas still attached. meaning it was not untied, it was ripped away. A wooden storage box bolted into a rock crevice 110 feet above the waterline is obliterated. And a block of stone weighing more than a ton has been moved from the cliff face onto the concrete path. Atmospheric storytelling wrote that the destruction was difficult to believe unless actually seen. And then he filed his report. Atmospheric storytelling is 9 pages long. I have read it. It is not a dramatic document. It is the work of a man who has walked a cliff face in late December and reasoned backward from broken iron. His conclusion: Ducat and Marshall descended to the west landing to secure the crane tackle before the weather got worse. The wooden storage box at 110 feet contained the ropes and handles they would have been worried about losing. While they were working at that elevation, an anomalous wave breached the geo, came up the cliff face, and took them. MacArthur, inside, either saw it coming from a window or heard the impact. He ran out in his shirt sleeves, which is why his coat stayed on the peg. He was trying to help. He did not make it back. The report ends with one line I want to read in full, because it is the only moment in the document where Muirhead allows himself a personal note. I visited Flannan Islands when the relief was made so lately as the 7th of December, and have the melancholy recollection that I was the last person to shake hands with them and bid them adieu. That is a man in 1901 writing an official document. That is what professional restraint sounded like. He knew Ducat. He had spent the summer of 1899 on that rock with Ducat. And when he put the file down on January 8th, he wrote one sentence that admitted it. No drama, no overturned chair, no uneaten meal, no weeping in the log. A professional man, a professional report, a plausible reconstruction, a sober conclusion. The case was closed. It did not stay closed. In 1912, a Georgian poet named Wilfred Wilson Gibson published a collection called Fires. It contained a poem called Flannan Isle. Gibson had never been to Island Moor. He was not a sailor, not a lighthouse keeper, not a historian. He was a man who had read about the case in the papers and seen a chance to write a Gothic ballad. The poem is 63 lines long. It opens with a relief crew approaching the rock. It builds atmosphere. It uses the 3 men on the cliff to describe the landing. And at the climax, it invents a scene that was never there. Here are the lines that did the damage.
Aye, though we hunted high and low, and hunted everywhere, of the 3 men's fate we found no trace, of any kind in any place, but a door ajar, and an untouched meal, and an over-toppled chair.
A door ajar, an untouched meal, an over-toppled chair. None of those things happened. Joseph Moore, the man who actually walked into that kitchen on December 26th, said the opposite. He said the morning's work had been completed. The dishes were washed. The fire was unlit, but it had been banked properly. Muirhead's report confirms it. The living quarters were in perfect order. But the poem was published. It was anthologized. It was taught in schools. It was read aloud on the BBC. It got set to music. And for reasons I think we can understand, the image of an overturned chair in an empty kitchen on a rock in the Atlantic turned out to be more powerful than the prose of an NLB superintendent's report. One is a line of poetry. The other is a filing. People remember poetry. This is where it should have ended. A poem that got the facts wrong. A minor footnote in the historiography. Instead, it got worse. In the middle of the 20th century, American pulp magazines discovered the Flannan Isles mystery. The pulps were a specific kind of market. They needed content that could fit between cigarette ads and run in a single issue. They paid a penny a word. They were not fact-checked. And they made things up on an industrial scale. Atmospheric storytelling. In the late 1940s or early 1950s, a writer invented a set of log entries, not a poem, log entries. Entries purporting to be from the actual keeper's log in the actual handwriting of the actual men, describing the days leading up to the disappearance. The entries are famous now. You have probably read them. You have probably read them recently if you have been on the internet. December 12th. Gale, north by northwest. Sea lashed to fury. Never seen such a storm. Waves very high, tearing at lighthouse. Everything shipshape. Ducat irritable. December 13th. Storm continued through night. Wind shifted west by north. Ducat quiet. MacArthur crying. Atmospheric storytelling. No log entry. December 15th. Storm ended. Sea calm. God is over all. That is the text. I have just read you a forgery. None of those entries exist, not one word. Mike Dash, the historian who dismantled this hoax in an article published in 14 Studies in 1998, tracked the entries back through multiple pulp sources and showed how they had been invented whole cloth, then cross-cited by later writers until they achieved a kind of false authority. Each citation made the next one feel more real. By the 1970s, the entries were being quoted in ostensibly serious books as if they had been transcribed from the original ledger. The problem with the entries, apart from the fact that they do not exist, is that they describe something the NLB logs never did. The logs never recorded the emotional states of the keepers. That was not what the logs were for. A lighthouse log was a technical document. It recorded weather data, the time the light was lit, the time it was extinguished, fuel consumption, and any operational issues. It did not record Ducat's mood. No log on any rock station ever did. And then there is the question of plausibility. James Ducat was a career NLB professional with 22 years of service. Thomas Marshall was a former North Atlantic seaman. Donald MacArthur was a former soldier. The suggestion that three men of that background, stationed in a lighthouse they had been living in for a year, would be reduced to tears and prayer by a storm, and then would make time in their professional duties to write about it in the station log is not a serious claim. It is a pulp writer's idea of what a lighthouse keeper is. MacArthur crying. That line was invented by a man sitting in a rented room in New York or Chicago, typing on a manual typewriter, collecting a penny a word. It has been cited thousands of times as evidence of a psychological collapse at sea. It is not evidence. It is a sentence someone wrote for money. What actually survives in the archive is thinner and stranger and more honest. The physical logbook was never deposited with the National Records of Scotland. What we have is Muirhead's direct transcription of the station slate, the chalkboard that held the most recent entries in his 1901 report. The slate contained weather readings, barometer, thermometer, wind, the time the light was extinguished, and that is it. No prayers, no weeping, no fear, no literary flourish. The last thing anyone wrote on Island Moor was the phrase, essentially, "The wind is blowing from this direction at this speed, and the lamp was put out at this hour." That is what a lighthouse keeper writes, right up until the moment he cannot write anymore. The forgeries did not stay in the pulps. They spread. In 1977, the writer Terrence Dix adapted the Flannan Isles story for a Doctor Who serial called Horror of Fang Rock. He set the story in an isolated lighthouse. He borrowed the claustrophobic frame. And he ended the episode with the Doctor, Tom Baker, reciting Gibson's poem on camera. Millions of British viewers learned the Flannan Isles mystery through a piece of science fiction that was based on a piece of Edwardian poetry that had gotten the facts wrong. In 1979, The composer Peter Maxwell Davies premiered a chamber opera called The Lighthouse, which dramatized the psychological disintegration of three keepers on a remote rock. The opera took as its premise the idea that the three men had cracked under isolation and turned on each other. The idea came from the forgeries, not from the record. In 2018, a feature film called The Vanishing, starring Gerard Butler, retold the Flannan story as a violent thriller involving discovered gold and mutual murder. It is a watchable film. It is not history. The case is a kind of Rorschach test. The Edwardian period, coming off the Victorian ghost story tradition, wanted Gothic horror, and Gibson gave it to them. The pulp era, which was obsessed with breakdown and isolation, wanted emotional collapse, and the forgers gave it to them. The Cold War era wanted secret agents and abduction, and the rumor mill obliged. The streaming era wants a thriller with a twist, and Netflix will supply one. Every generation has reached into the vacuum at the center of this case and pulled out what it needed. Atmospheric storytelling. What the record actually contains is Muirhead's report, Moore's letter, Harvey's telegram, and a slate with weather data on it. That is the case. Everything else is commentary. I want to read you one more primary source because this one is rarely quoted, and it is the most human document we have from the scene itself. Joseph Moore, the relief keeper, the man who walked into the empty kitchen, wrote a letter to the NLB on December 28, 1900, 2 days after the discovery. He was trying to describe what he found. He wrote, "I then entered the rooms in succession, found the beds empty, just as they left them in the early morning. I did not take time to search further, for I only too well knew that something serious had occurred. I darted out and made for the landing." Darted out, made for the landing. That is what it felt like to be the first person in. Not poetic, not Gothic. A man in a hurry, writing 2 days later, trying to describe the moment he understood his colleagues were not coming back. That is the record. The rogue wave hypothesis is now the scholarly consensus. It was Muirhead's conclusion in 1901, and it has gotten more defensible every decade since, because the science has caught up with him. For most of the 20th century, mariners who reported encountering walls of water 100 feet high were dismissed as liars or drunks or both. Rogue waves, as a physical phenomenon, were considered folklore. That changed on January 1st, 1995, when a research platform in the North Sea called the Blackmere oil rig recorded an instrument-verified wave that rose to 25.6 meters, about 84 feet, in a sea state where the average wave height was around 12 meters. The Blackmere wave was not a myth, it was data. And after Blackmere, oceanographers went looking for the mechanism, and they found it: constructive interference. When smaller waves align, their crests combining at the same point, they produce a single, much taller wave that dissipates almost immediately. It is a freak of geometry. It happens more often than anyone realized. It is especially common at the boundaries of strong ocean currents. The waters around the Flannan Isles are exactly the kind of environment where these events occur. Uninterrupted Atlantic fetch, strong currents, deep water running up against a vertical wall of rock. And then there is the geo. The west landing of Island Moore, as I mentioned earlier, terminates in a sea cave. When a large swell enters that geo, the water is funneled into a progressively narrower channel. The cave at the landward end provides a backstop. The physics of the situation does what physics does. Kinetic energy has to go somewhere. When it cannot go forward, it goes up. A 20-foot open ocean swell entering that specific geo can amplify into a vertical column of water that reaches 100 feet or more for the span of a second or two before collapsing back into itself. Ducat and Marshall were working at 110 feet. They were trying to secure the tackle inside a wooden box bolted into the cliff face because the NLB required its men to protect station property from weather. That is what the job was. The wave that came up that geo was the wave Muirhead reverse-engineered from the damage. It bent iron. It moved a 1-ton rock. It tore a life buoy off its lashings. 2 men working at that elevation had no chance. MacArthur, inside the lighthouse, probably saw the water come up. From the upper windows, a column of white going vertical past the cliff face is not something you can miss. He would have known immediately what was happening and to whom. He ran out without his coat because he had seconds, not minutes. Whether he was trying to throw a line or reach the winch or simply to get eyes on his men, we cannot know. What we know is that he did not come back either. That is the wave theory. It fits the evidence. It was Muirhead's theory in 1901. It is still the best one we have. But I want to tell you one more thing about that rock, because it matters for how this case feels, even when the physics is clean. In 1703, almost 2 centuries before the lighthouse, a Gaelic-speaking writer named Martin published a book called A Description of the Western Islands of Scotland. Martin was a native of Skye. He had traveled to the Hebrides and collected observations from the people who lived there. His book is one of the most important sources we have for pre-industrial Hebridean culture. Martin wrote about the Flannan Isles. The people who used the islands at that time were fowlers, men who made the voyage out from Lewis to harvest seabirds, eggs, and feathers. The harvest was valuable, the voyage was dangerous, and the rituals surrounding it were strict. Martin described how the fowlers, when they landed, would approach the ruined chapel of St. Flannan at the summit of Island Moor. The chapel had been built by an Irish bishop in the 6th or 7th century. It was roofless by Martin's time, but the men still observed its sanctity. Martin wrote, "When they are come within about 20 paces of the altar, they all strip themselves of their upper garments at once, and their upper clothes being laid upon a stone." There are more rules. Certain words could not be spoken on the island. The island of St. Kilda, to the southwest, could not be referred to by its proper name. It had to be called the High Country. There were songs that could not be sung. There were provisions that had to be given away before the boats returned to Lewis. The rituals were specific, and they were not optional. The islands had a name before the 7 hunters. Locally, they were called the domain of evil spirits, the other country. Shepherds who took their sheep out to Island Moor to fatten them on the rich grass, which was said to cure ailing livestock, refused to stay overnight. They feared encountering what the old stories called the Phantom of the 7 Hunters. When the NLB announced in the late 1890s that it was going to build a permanent light on Island Moor, the oral tradition on Lewis held that the spirits would be angered by the intrusion. This was not a minority view. It was the local understanding. And then, a little over a year after the light was lit, the 3 men who tended it were gone, and the rock stayed empty. And the people on Lewis, who had warned about the spirits, felt, in the way that people feel such things, a particular kind of vindication. I am not going to tell you there is a phantom on the 7 hunters. The wave explains the evidence. The physics is sound. But I will tell you this. The people who knew that rock longest, who fished it and grazed it and worshipped on it for 1,000 years before anyone thought to put a lighthouse on it, had a consistent position. They would not sleep there. They would not speak certain names there. They would not stay when the weather turned. They made their peace with it, and they went home before the light failed. 3 professional men from the NLB went out in 1899 and lived there for a year, and on a December morning in 1900, the rock took them. The folklore and the physics are not, in the end, telling different stories. The last line anyone wrote on Island Moor was a weather reading. Barometer, thermometer, wind direction, the time the lamp was put out for the dawn. No fear, no prayer, no sense of what was coming. 3 professional men had done their morning work, and one of them had gone to the slate to record the particulars, because that was the job. Atmospheric storytelling happened quickly enough that nobody wrote anything else. I want you to hold that in your head. Not the overturned chair, not the untouched meal, not MacArthur crying. Those things are Gothic inventions by men who never stood on that rock. The real closing image is a piece of chalk in a man's hand, writing the wind speed, and then the chalk going down on a ledge, and then a door. The lighthouse went automatic in 1971. No keeper has lived on Elan Moor since. The chapel of St. Flannan is still there, roofless, at the summit of the island, as it was when Martin wrote about it in 1703, as it was when Duckett and Marshall and MacArthur walked past it every day for a year. The grass that the Lewis shepherds said could cure sick sheep is still growing over it. The geos are still doing what geos do. The wave that took those 3 men was not the first wave that came up the West Landing cliff at 110 feet. It will not be the last. The question I am left with is not what killed them. The evidence on that is as good as we are going to get. The question is why this case, of all the maritime tragedies of that winter, has refused to die. I think the answer is that the record is sparse enough to make room for us. Every generation fills the silence with its own fears. The Edwardians wanted ghosts. The pulp writers wanted breakdown. The 21st century wants a thriller. The rock obliges all of them. It just sits there, as it has for 300 million years, and lets us project. The 3 men it took were real. They had names. They had wives and children and fathers. They had boots that creaked and coats they hung on pegs. One of them left his coat behind because he did not have time to grab it. I'm A.M. Blackmere. Thank you for listening.